Susan Miller walked through the quiet halls of the Oakwood Opera House after everyone had gone home. The big clock on the wall showed it was almost midnight. Susan was tired, but she still had work to do. She pushed her cleaning cart past the empty offices and dressing rooms. Her plain blue uniform had a few stains from the day's work, and her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. At 42 years old, Susan had been the night janitor at the Oakwood for 15 years. She liked working when the building was empty. During the day, the opera house was filled with beautiful people who barely noticed her. They walked past her like she was just another part of the building, like a chair or a light fixture. Susan didn't mind. She had always been shy, and she found peace in being invisible. Tonight, like most nights, Susan hummed quietly to herself as she emptied trash cans and wiped down surfaces. The tune was from La Traviata, an opera she had heard many times while cleaning. She knew all the music that was performed at the Oakwood, even though she had never sat in the audience during a show. When Susan finished cleaning the main hallway, she moved to the practice rooms. In the first room, someone had left sheet music on the piano. Susan paused her cleaning to look at it. The title at the top read, Pace Pace Mio Dio, from the opera La Forza del Destino. Susan knew this piece well. It was one of the most difficult areas for a soprano to sing. Susan looked around to make sure she was alone. Then she carefully placed the sheet music back on the piano and began to sing the first few notes. Her voice started soft and unsure, but grew stronger with each measure. The sound filled the small practice room, bouncing off the walls and returning to her ears. Susan closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by the music. What no one at the Oakwood knew was that Susan had a natural gift. Her voice was extraordinary, pure, powerful, and full of emotion. She had discovered this gift as a child, singing along to old records in her grandmother's house. But life had been hard for Susan's family. There was no money for music lessons, and her parents had encouraged her to focus on more practical things. So, Susan had put her dreams aside and taken the cleaning job at the Oakwood. She told herself it was enough to be near the music she loved, and over the years she had turned the opera house into her own private school. She listened carefully during rehearsals, memorizing the instructions the voice coaches gave to the singers. Late at night, she would sneak into the practice rooms and try those same techniques herself. Susan had also collected discarded programs and music books from the trash. She kept them in a small box under her bed at home. Every morning before sleep, she would study them, teaching herself to read music and learning the meaning of the Italian, French, and German words in the lyrics. Tonight, as Susan sang the difficult aria, she hit a particularly high note perfectly. The sound rang out clear and true. Susan smiled to herself, feeling a small moment of pride. Then she quickly put the sheet music back exactly as she had found it and returned to her cleaning cart. She still had many rooms to clean before morning. Next day, the Oakwood was busier than usual. A new production was starting, and singers and musicians filled the halls. Susan came in early to finish some work from the night before. She kept her head down as she mopped the floor near the main rehearsal room. Inside the room, the director, Peter Grant, was speaking to the assembled cast. Susan could hear his voice through the partially open door. This production of La Forza del Destino will put the Oakwood on the map, Peter said. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. But it will only work if we have perfection from every single one of you. The singers nodded, some looking nervous. Peter was known for being extremely demanding. He had worked at the biggest opera houses in New York and Europe before coming to the Oakwood, and he expected the same level of excellence here. Nancy, Peter called to a woman in the front row. You'll be singing Pace Pace Mio Dio, as we discussed. Let's hear where you are with it. Nancy Ford stood up. She was the lead soprano, a beautiful woman with red hair and expensive clothes. She walked to the center of the room with confidence. The piano player, Joe Bell, began to play, the introduction to the aria. Susan paused her mopping to listen. This was the same piece she had been singing the night before. As Nancy began to sing, Susan could tell that she was very good. Her voice was strong and well-trained. But when she reached the difficult high notes in the middle section, she struggled. Her voice cracked slightly and she stopped. I'm sorry, Nancy said. I'm still working on that section. Peter frowned. That section is the heart of the aria, Nancy. If you can't handle it, perhaps we should consider someone else for the role. Nancy's face turned red. No one can sing that section perfectly. It's famously difficult. Nonsense, Peter said. It's difficult, yes, but not impossible. I've heard it sung perfectly before. You have 3 weeks to get it right. Susan finished her mopping and moved on to the next hallway, still listening as the rehearsal continued. For the rest of the day, she heard different singers practicing their parts as she went about her cleaning duties. The opera house was alive with music and activity. Costume designers rushed through the halls with fabric samples. Set builders carried pieces of scenery. Everyone was focused on the upcoming production. As Susan worked, she was careful to stay out of the way. A few times, people bumped into her without apologizing or even looking at her. Once, someone handed her an empty coffee cup without a word, assuming she was there to take it. Susan accepted these small hurts as part of her invisible life. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Susan returned to the practice room with the sheet music for Pace Pace Mio Dio. She spent an hour working on the difficult section that had given Nancy trouble. Susan had to admit it was challenging, but after many attempts, she was able to sing it smoothly. The high notes were within her range, and she had learned from years of secret practice how to control her breathing for the long phrases. What Susan didn't know was that the night security guard, Bill West, had been passing by the practice room. He stopped, surprised by the beautiful voice he heard coming from inside. Bill had worked at the Oakwood for only a few months, and he had never spoken to Susan. He stood outside the door, listening in amazement as she sang the difficult aria perfectly. When she finished, Bill quietly continued his rounds, deciding not to embarrass her by letting her know he had heard. The next morning, Susan was more tired than usual. She had stayed too long practicing and hadn't gotten enough sleep. As she cleaned the mirrors in the women's bathroom, she heard Nancy and another singer, Diane Porter, talking by the sinks. "I don't know if I can do it, Diane," Nancy said. "That area is impossible. Peter is being unreasonable." "You'll get it," Diane assured her. "You just need more time to practice." 3 weeks isn't enough time, Nancy complained, and Peter knows it. "I think he wants me to fail so he can replace me with someone from his old company in New York." Susan kept her eyes on her work, but she couldn't help feeling sorry for Nancy. The pressure to perform perfectly must be enormous. Susan was grateful that no one expected anything from her. She could sing for her own pleasure, with no one to judge or criticize her. But a small voice inside Susan wondered what it would be like to stand on the stage, to let her voice fill the grand theater, to share the music she loved with an audience. It was a dream she had buried long ago, but sometimes, like now, it resurfaced and made her heart ache with longing. Susan pushed these thoughts away and continued cleaning. Her place was here, behind the scenes, invisible and unnoticed. That was how it had always been, and that was how it would always be. Or so she thought. 1 week passed, and the mood at the Oakwood Opera House grew tense. Peter Grant pushed the singers harder each day. He was never satisfied, always demanding more. Nancy Ford struggled the most. Every time she practiced Pace, Pace Mio Dio, Peter found something wrong with her performance. "No, no, no," Peter shouted during Thursday's rehearsal. "You're not connecting with the emotion of the piece, Nancy. This aria is about pain and longing. I don't feel anything when you sing it." Nancy's face turned red. "I'm trying my best, Peter." "Well, your best isn't good enough," Peter said coldly. "Take a break. We'll try again in an hour." Susan was dusting the light fixtures in the back of the rehearsal room when this happened. She kept her eyes down, pretending not to listen. Nancy stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The other singers and musicians looked uncomfortable. Some of them whispered to each other. Peter sighed loudly. "Let's move on to the chorus parts for now." As the rehearsal continued, Susan finished her dusting and moved on to emptying the trash cans. She tried to be as quiet as possible, but when she reached for the can near the piano, she accidentally knocked over a stack of sheet music. "I'm sorry," Susan said softly as she bent down to pick up the papers. Kevin Adams, a tenor with slicked back hair and an expensive watch, looked at her with annoyance. "Can't you do that later? We're trying to rehearse here." "Leave her alone." "Kevin," said Diane Porter. "She's just doing her job." Kevin rolled his eyes. "Whatever, it's bad enough we have to deal with Peter's mood without the cleaning staff getting in the way too." Susan quickly gathered the papers and put them back on the piano. Her hands were shaking slightly. She hated being the center of attention. As she hurried to finish her work and leave the room, she could feel Kevin watching her. Later that afternoon, Susan was cleaning the women's bathroom when Nancy came in. Her eyes were red from crying, and she splashed cold water on her face at the sink. When she noticed Susan, Nancy gave her a small, sad smile. "Rough day?" Susan asked, surprising herself by speaking up. Nancy sighed. "You have no idea. Peter is impossible to please." "I heard the rehearsal earlier," Susan admitted. "You sound beautiful to me." Nancy looked at Susan with surprise, as if really seeing her for the first time. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say, but Peter doesn't think so, and he's the one who matters." "Maybe you just need to connect more with the feelings in the song," Susan suggested, then immediately regretted it. Who was she to give advice to a professional singer? But Nancy didn't seem offended. "You know the aria?" Susan nodded. "I've heard it many times, working here." "It's the hardest piece I've ever attempted," Nancy said. "The emotional range, the breathing control, those high notes, and Peter expects perfection." Susan wanted to say more, to share what she had learned about the aria during her late-night practice sessions, but she held back. It wasn't her place. She was just the cleaning lady. Nancy checked her watch. "I should get back. Break's almost over." She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "Wish me luck." "Good luck," Susan said, and watched as Nancy left the bathroom, head held high despite her obvious stress. The afternoon rehearsal went no better than the morning one. Peter's criticism of Nancy grew harsher. Finally, after a particularly cutting remark about her lack of emotional depth, Nancy threw her sheet music on the floor. "I quit," she shouted. "Find someone else to abuse, Peter. I'm done." The room fell silent as Nancy grabbed her bag and coat. No one tried to stop her as she walked out. After the door closed behind her, Peter ran his hands through his silver hair. "Take 30 minutes, everyone," he said, his voice tired. "When we come back, we'll work on the chorus parts again." The singers and musicians filed out of the rehearsal room, many of them looking relieved to escape the tension. Susan waited until everyone was gone before entering to clean up. She picked up Nancy's discarded sheet music from the floor and placed it neatly on a chair. As she worked, Susan heard voices in the hallway. Kevin Adams was talking loudly to a group of chorus members. "Peter is driving everyone crazy," Kevin said. "First Nancy, and who's next? He acts like only a goddess could sing that aria properly." Susan continued cleaning, trying not to listen. But then Kevin appeared in the doorway. When he saw Susan, a strange smile spread across his face. "Well, look who's here," he said. "The cleaning lady who knows so much about opera." Susan froze, her hand tightening around the handle of her broom. How did he know about her conversation with Nancy? Kevin walked into the room, followed by 4 other singers, including Diane Porter. "Nancy told me you were giving her advice about the aria. Said you've heard it many times." He made air quotes with his fingers. "I bet you think you could do better, don't you?" "Leave her alone, Kevin," Diane said. "This isn't funny." But Kevin wasn't listening. He grabbed Susan's arm and pulled her toward the center of the room. "Hey, everyone, the cleaning lady thinks she knows opera. Maybe she should sing for us." More people had gathered in the doorway, attracted by the commotion. Susan felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. She looked at the floor, wishing she could disappear. "Stop it, Kevin," Diane tried again. "You're being a jerk." "I'm just having a little fun," Kevin said. "Come on, cleaning lady. Show us what you've got. Sing something for us." Susan shook her head, unable to speak. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "What's going on in here?" Peter Grant's voice cut through the noise. He stood in the doorway, frowning at the scene before him. Kevin didn't let go of Susan's arm. "Just a little entertainment during our break, Peter. The cleaning lady here thinks she knows opera. I thought we could use a good laugh." Peter's cold eyes moved from Kevin to Susan. She looked small and frightened in her blue uniform, surrounded by the elegant singers in their rehearsal clothes. "Is that so?" Peter said. "And what exactly does our cleaning lady know about opera?" Susan finally found her voice. "Nothing. I don't know anything. Please, I need to finish my work." But Kevin wouldn't let it go. Nancy said she was giving her advice about the aria, about connecting with the emotions. He mimicked Susan's voice in a high, mocking tone. Peter raised an eyebrow. "Really? Well, perhaps we should hear what she has to offer." He walked to the piano and sat down. "Do you know Pas mio Dio?" he asked Susan. The room went completely quiet. Susan looked around at all the faces watching her. Some looked embarrassed, others curious. A few, like Kevin, were clearly expecting to be entertained by her failure. "I asked you a question," Peter said, his fingers poised above the keys. "Do you know the aria or not?" Susan nodded slightly, her mouth dry with fear. "Then sing it," Peter commanded. "Show us this emotional connection that Nancy is lacking." Susan stood frozen, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. She had never sung in front of anyone before, not since she was a child. And now these professional singers, these beautiful, talented people, wanted her to perform one of the most difficult arias in all of opera. I can't," she whispered. "Oh, come on," Kevin said with a laugh. "You were brave enough to give Nancy advice. Surely you can show us how it's done." Susan looked at Diane, hoping for help, but even she seemed curious now about what Susan might do. There was no escape. They were all waiting, watching. Peter played the opening notes of the aria. The familiar melody filled the room, and despite her fear, Susan felt something stir inside her. This was the music she loved, the music she sang, alone in the empty opera house night after night. This was her secret joy, her hidden passion. As the introduction neared its end, the moment when the soprano should begin to sing, Susan closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, just as she had practiced countless times before, and opened her mouth. The first note that came from Susan's mouth was soft and shaky. Some of the singers in the room smirked, looking at each other as if to say, "This is going to be embarrassing." Kevin crossed his arms, a satisfied smile on his face. He had wanted to humiliate Susan, and it seemed he was getting his wish. But then something changed. As Susan continued to sing, her voice grew stronger. The shakiness disappeared. The notes became clear and pure. By the end of the first line, the smirks had frozen on the singers' faces. By the second line, those smirks had transformed into looks of surprise. Peter's fingers moved across the piano keys, but his eyes were fixed on Susan. The janitor in the plain blue uniform was singing one of opera's most difficult arias, and she was singing it well. Very well. Susan kept her eyes closed. She was still afraid, but the music carried her forward. She forgot about the people watching her. She forgot about her embarrassment. In her mind, she was alone in the empty opera house, singing to the silent seats as she had done so many nights before. The aria, Pas mio Dio, tells the story of a woman in deep pain. She begs for peace but cannot find it. As Susan sang these words, her voice filled with emotion. She understood this character. She knew what it meant to long for something that seemed out of reach. She had felt that longing every day for 15 years, watching others live her dream while she cleaned up after them. When Susan reached the difficult middle section, the part that had given Nancy so much trouble, the room grew even more still. This was the moment when most singers struggled. The notes were extremely high. The phrases were long, requiring perfect breath control. Many professional sopranos avoided this aria because of this section. Susan took a deep breath and began the challenging passage. Her voice soared higher and higher, reaching notes that seemed impossible. Yet she hit each one perfectly. Her breath control was flawless. allowing her to hold the long phrases without strain. The emotion in her voice was raw and real, bringing the character's pain to life. In the back of the room, Diane Porter's eyes filled with tears. Next to her, a young chorus member named Eric Jones stood with his mouth open in shock. Kevin Adams had lost his smug smile. His face had gone pale, and he stared at Susan as if seeing a ghost. Peter Grant's fingers never missed a note on the piano, but his face showed his amazement. He was a man who had heard the best singers in the world perform, on the greatest stages. Yet here, in this rehearsal room, a janitor was singing with a talent that rivaled any he had ever heard. As Susan approached the end of the aria, she finally opened her eyes. The sight that greeted her was overwhelming. Everyone in the room was staring at her with expressions of awe, disbelief, or shock. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others looked like they had seen something impossible happen before their eyes. Susan's voice grew softer for the final phrases of the aria, filling them with a gentle sadness that was more powerful than any loud note could be. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for a moment, then faded away. Complete silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time had stopped in the rehearsal room of the Oakwood Opera House. Peter's hands lifted from the piano keys. He slowly turned on the bench to face Susan fully. His usual cold expression was gone, replaced by wonder and confusion. "Where?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Did you learn to sing like that?" Susan's hands twisted nervously in the fabric of her uniform. The spell of the music was broken, and she suddenly remembered who she was. Just the cleaning lady, standing before all these important people who were now staring at her. I didn't learn exactly," she stammered. "I just listen a lot." "That's not possible," Kevin said, finding his voice at last. "No one sings like that without training." Susan looked at the floor. "I've worked here for 15 years, she said. Softly, "I hear the music every day. I listen to the voice coaches giving lessons. Sometimes after everyone leaves, I practice." "For 15 years?" Peter asked. "You've been teaching yourself opera, alone, for 15 years?" Susan nodded, her face flushing with embarrassment. Peter stood up from the piano bench and walked toward her. "Do you have any idea how remarkable that is? Do you understand what you just did?" He gestured around the room. "These are professional singers who have studied music their entire lives, who have paid thousands of dollars for the best training, and none of them, not one, could sing that aria the way you just did." Susan didn't know what to say. This didn't seem real. Maybe she was dreaming, and soon she would wake up and go back to her quiet life of cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. Bill West, the night security guard, stepped forward from the back of the room. "It's true," he said. "I've heard her singing at night sometimes. Never wanted to say anything because I didn't want to embarrass her, but she sounds like that all the time." Susan looked at Bill with surprise. She had no idea anyone had ever heard her singing. "Can you read music?" Peter asked her. "A little," Susan admitted. "I taught myself from books and papers I found. Sometimes people throw away sheet music or programs and I take them home." Diane wiped tears from her eyes. "All these years you've been here cleaning up after us, listening, learning, and none of us ever noticed you." Susan didn't say anything. What could she say? That she had accepted her place in life? That she had buried her dreams so deep she hardly remembered having them? That she had found a small happiness in her secret singing, never expecting anything more? The door to the rehearsal room opened, and Nancy Ford walked in. She looked around at the strange scene, the silent singers, Peter standing before Susan, the tension in the air. "What's going on?" Nancy asked. "I came back to apologize, but you just missed the most incredible performance of Pace Mio Dio I have ever heard," Peter said, still looking at Susan, from the most unexpected source. Nancy's eyes moved to Susan, standing small and frightened in her janitor's uniform. "Her?" Nancy asked in disbelief. "Me," Susan whispered, hardly believing it herself. Peter turned to face the entire room. "I want everyone to listen carefully," he said. "What we just witnessed was extraordinary. In my 30 years in opera, I have never heard such natural talent. And I'm not going to let it go to waste." He looked back at Susan. "You can't go back to being just the cleaning lady, not after what we just heard. That voice doesn't belong in an empty theater at midnight. It belongs on stage in front of an audience." Susan shook her head. "No, I couldn't. I don't know how to perform. I've never—" "You just did perform," Peter said. "And it was magnificent." "But I'm not a singer," Susan protested. "I'm a janitor." "Not anymore," Peter said firmly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Nancy stepped forward. Her face showed a mix of emotions, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "I want to hear her," she said. "I want to hear what everyone's talking about." Peter nodded and returned to the piano. "Again?" he asked Susan. Susan looked around the room. Kevin was still staring at her with disbelief. Diane and several others were smiling encouragingly. Bill gave her a thumbs up from the back. Nancy stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Susan took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but something else was growing alongside it. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try again." As Peter began to play the introduction to the aria once more, Susan closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. When she opened them, she didn't look at the floor anymore. She stood a little straighter. Her voice, when it came, started strong and clear from the very first note. This time, as she sang, Susan watched the faces of those listening. She saw their expressions change from curiosity to amazement. She saw Nancy's arms slowly uncross, her eyes widening with each phrase. She saw Kevin's face flush with shame. And for the first time in her life, Susan Miller, the invisible janitor of the Oakwood Opera House, was truly seen. The next day, Susan arrived at the Oakwood Opera House at her usual time. But instead of changing into her blue uniform and starting her cleaning rounds, she was met at the door by Peter Grant. "There you are," Peter said. "I was afraid you might not come back." Susan adjusted the strap of her worn purse nervously. "I still have a job to do," she said. "The floors won't clean themselves." Peter shook his head. "You're not cleaning anything today. Come with me." He led Susan through the lobby and down the main hallway to his office. Susan had cleaned this office hundreds of times, but she had never sat in one of the comfortable chairs across from Peter's desk. It felt strange to be there as a guest rather than a cleaner. "I spent most of last night thinking about you," Peter said as he sat down. "About what happened yesterday in that rehearsal room. I've been in opera for 30 years, Susan. I've worked with the best singers in the world, and I have never, ever heard a natural talent like yours." Susan looked down at her hands. They were rough from years of cleaning, scrubbing floors, wiping windows, handling harsh chemicals, not the soft, cared-for hands of a singer. "I don't know what you want from me," she said quietly. "I want you to join our company," Peter said, simply. "I want you to train properly this time with real teachers, and I want you to sing the lead role in La Forza del Destino." Susan's head jerked up. "That's Nancy's role. Nancy quit, remember? And even if she hadn't after hearing you sing that aria," Peter trailed off, then leaned forward. "Susan, do you understand what a gift you have? You've hidden it away for 15 years. Don't you think it's time to share it with the world?" Susan felt tears forming in her eyes. "I'm 42 years old. I've never performed on stage. I've never had a single lesson. I don't even own nice clothes. How can you think I could sing a lead role?" "Age doesn't matter," Peter said firmly. "Some of the greatest sopranos in history didn't peak until their 40s or 50s. As for the rest, we can teach you what you need to know about performing, and the company can help with a wardrobe." Susan shook her head, overwhelmed. "This is happening too fast. Yesterday I was invisible. Today you want me to be a star." "You were never invisible," Peter said gently. "You just weren't being seen. There's a difference." A knock at the office door interrupted them. Diane Porter peeked in. her face lighting up when she saw Susan. "You came back," Diane said. "We were all hoping you would. May I come in?" Peter nodded and Diane entered, followed by Joe Bell, the piano player, and Eric Jones, one of the younger chorus members. "We wanted to see you," Joe said to Susan, "to tell you how amazing you were yesterday." "I've never heard anything like it," Eric added. "I actually dreamed about your voice last night." Susan felt her face grow warm with embarrassment. No one had ever said such things to her before. "Is it true?" Diane asked, looking at Peter. "Are you really going to give her the lead role?" "If she'll take it," Peter replied. All eyes turned to Susan. She felt trapped, confused. Everything was moving, too quickly. "I need time to think," she said. "This is all so sudden." "Of course," Peter said. "Take the day, but I hope you'll say yes." When Susan left Peter's office, she didn't know where to go. She couldn't face the cleaning closet and her cart and mop. Not now, not after what had happened. Instead, she found herself walking toward the main theater. The stage door was unlocked. Susan slipped inside and stood in the wings, looking out at the empty stage. How many times had she cleaned this stage, sweeping and mopping while imagining what it would be, like to stand there with an audience watching? Now Peter was offering her that chance and she was afraid to take it. It's different when you look at it from this angle, isn't it? Susan turned to find Nancy Ford standing behind her. Susan tensed, expecting anger or resentment. But Nancy's face showed only curiosity. "I heard you sing," Nancy said. "After I came back yesterday, I stood in the back and listened while you performed the aria a second time." "I'm sorry," Susan said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Nancy shook her head. "Don't be sorry. What you did was remarkable. I've studied opera my entire life, and I can't sing that aria the way you did." "Peter wants me to take your role," Susan blurted out. To her surprise, Nancy laughed. "I know. He called me last night to tell me. That's Peter, always chasing perfection, no matter who gets hurt along the way." "I haven't said yes," Susan said, quickly. "But you will," Nancy replied. She wasn't angry, just stating what she saw as a fact. "You have to. A voice like yours can't stay hidden forever." "I'm scared," Susan admitted. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be seen." Nancy was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped closer to Susan. "Look, I won't pretend this doesn't hurt my pride. It does. But I'm a professional, and I know extraordinary talent when I hear it. If you say yes to Peter, I want to help you." Susan stared at her in shock. "Help me? Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Nancy said. "And because maybe I can learn something from you too." She smiled slightly. "You connected with that area in a way I never could. I want to understand how you did that." Before Susan could respond, the stage door opened again, and Kevin Adams walked in. He stopped when he saw Susan and Nancy together. "Am I interrupting?" he asked awkwardly. "Not at all," Nancy said coolly. "Susan and I were just discussing her new role." Kevin looked uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his hair and cleared his throat. I was looking for you, actually," he said to Susan. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. The way I treated you it was cruel and stupid. I'm sorry." Susan didn't know what to say. After years of being overlooked and ignored, suddenly people were seeking her out, to offer her roles, to help her, to apologize to her. It was overwhelming. "Thank you for saying that," she finally managed. Kevin nodded. "I also wanted to say that you were amazing, truly amazing. And if Peter gives you the lead, which he should, I'd be honored to sing alongside you." After Kevin left, Nancy turned to Susan with raised eyebrows. Well, you've certainly made an impression. Kevin Adams admitting he was wrong. That might be an even greater miracle than your voice." Susan couldn't help but smile a little at that. "Come on," Nancy said, taking Susan's arm. "Let's go find Peter and tell him you're accepting the role." "But I haven't decided yet," Susan protested. Nancy gave her a knowing look. "Yes, you have. You decided 15 years ago when you first started singing in an empty theater, instead of going home after your shift. You just didn't know it yet. Susan felt something shift inside her. Nancy was right. All those years of listening, learning, practicing in secret, they had been leading to this moment. She had always wanted this chance, even when she told herself it was impossible. Together, they walked back toward Peter's office. Word had spread throughout the opera house about the janitor with the extraordinary voice. As Susan and Nancy passed through the hallways, people stopped to stare. Some smiled encouragingly. Others whispered behind their hands. Susan felt exposed, visible in a way she had never been before. Outside Peter's office, Susan paused. "What if I fail?" she asked Nancy. "What if I can't do this?" "You won't fail," Nancy said firmly. "Not with that voice, and not with me helping you." Susan took a deep breath and knocked on Peter's door. When his voice called for her to enter, she opened the door with a steadiness that surprised her. Peter looked up from his desk, his eyebrows raised in question. "I'll do it," Susan said. "I'll take the role." The smile that spread across Peter's face was like nothing Susan had seen from him before. He had been cold and demanding with everyone else, but with her he was almost gentle. "You've made the right decision," he said. "We start rehearsals tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp." As Susan left Peter's office, she realized that her life had changed, completely in less than 24 hours. Yesterday she had been invisible, just the woman who cleaned up after everyone else. Today she was the lead soprano in the Oakwood Opera House's production of La Forza del Destino. She still didn't know if she could do it. The stage fright, the performing, the being watched by hundreds of people, it all terrified her. But her voice, the voice she had hidden for so long, deserved its chance to be heard. And Susan, after 15 years in the shadows, was finally ready to step into the light. 3 weeks passed quickly. Susan's life changed completely during this time. Instead of pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways, she spent her days in rehearsals. Instead of wearing a blue uniform, she wore beautiful costumes made just for her. Instead of being invisible, she was the center of attention. The change wasn't easy. Susan struggled with stage fright. Her hands shook when too many people watched her. She forgot her lines sometimes and missed her cues. But her voice never failed her. Each time she sang, everyone in the room fell silent and listened with wonder. Nancy kept her promise to help Susan. She taught her how to move on stage, how to remember her lines, and how to manage her nerves. Kevin, wanting to make up for his cruelty, helped Susan learn the correct pronunciations of the Italian words in the opera. Even Bill, the night security guard, did his part by staying late, so Susan could practice on the main stage after hours when no one was watching. Peter was the biggest surprise. The cold, demanding director who had made Nancy cry became patient and kind with Susan. He never raised his voice when she made mistakes. He never pushed her too hard. He seemed to understand that her talent was like a wild bird that might fly away if handled too roughly. "You're doing wonderfully," Peter told Susan one day after rehearsal. "The other singers have had years of training, and you're already better than most of them." Susan shook her head. "I still don't feel ready. The opening night is only 3 days away. What if I freeze on stage? What if I let everyone down?" "You won't," Peter said firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That night, Susan couldn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table in her apartment, looking at the poster for La Forza del Destino that Peter had given her. Her name was on it, Susan Miller in the role of Leonora. Her name in big letters on a poster for an opera. It still didn't seem real. The morning of opening night, Susan woke up feeling sick with fear. She had dreamed that she walked on stage and opened her mouth to sing, but no sound came out. The audience had laughed at her, and Peter had shaken, his head in disappointment. She arrived at the opera house early. The building was quiet, with only a few staff members preparing for the evening performance. Susan walked slowly through the halls, remembering how she used to clean them. It felt like a different life now, like someone else's memories. In the costume room, Susan found her dress for the night, a beautiful blue gown with silver details. Next to it was a small box with her name on it. Inside was a silver necklace with a single pearl. A note from the cast read, "For our star, shine bright tonight." Susan's eyes filled with tears. 3 weeks ago, these people had barely noticed her. Now they were giving her gifts and calling her their star. As the day went on, the opera house filled with activity. The orchestra arrived for final practice. The stage crew checked the sets and lights. The other singers began to appear, getting into costume and warming up their voices. The nervous energy grew stronger as opening time approached. Susan stayed, in her dressing room, afraid to talk to anyone. Nancy came to check on her a few times, offering encouragement and advice. So did Peter. But mostly, Susan was alone with her thoughts and her fear. An hour before the show, Susan put on her costume and the pearl necklace. She looked in the mirror and hardly recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was elegant and beautiful, nothing like the invisible janitor she had been for so many years. "Places in 30 minutes," called a voice in the hallway. Susan's heart raced. This was really happening. In half an hour, she would walk onto that stage in front of hundreds of people. She would sing the aria that had changed her life, and everyone would be watching, judging, waiting to see if the cleaning lady could really be an opera star. There was a knock at her door. Susan expected Nancy or Peter, but when she opened it, she found a small, older woman standing there. "Hello," the woman said. "You don't know me, but I had to meet you before the show. My name is Mary Wilson. I clean the offices in the building next door. I heard about you from Bill. He told me your story." Susan didn't know what to say. The woman continued, "I just wanted to tell you that you're singing for all of us tonight. All the invisible people who work in the shadows. All the people with dreams they've kept hidden." Mary's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for being brave enough to step into the light." Before Susan could respond, Mary gave her a quick hug and hurried away. Susan stood in her doorway, feeling something new and powerful growing inside her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about proving she could sing. She was representing something larger. All the hidden talents, all the secret dreams that people carried while the world ignored them. 5 minutes to places. The call came through the hallway. Susan took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with determination. She wouldn't let Mary down. She wouldn't let herself down. Backstage was crowded with singers and crew members. Everyone was focused on their tasks, but they all paused to smile at Susan as she passed. Kevin gave her a thumbs up. Nancy squeezed her hand. Peter stood at the edge of the stage watching the audience file in. When he saw Susan, he nodded once, his eyes full of confidence in her. "Full house," he said quietly. "Word got out about our amazing new soprano." Susan peeked through the curtain. The theater was indeed full. Row after row of well-dressed people sat talking and looking at their programs. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that the woman they were about to see had been cleaning this very theater just 3 weeks ago. The orchestra began to tune their instruments. The lights in the theater dimmed. It was time. Susan closed her eyes and thought of all the nights she had spent alone in this building, singing to empty seats, dreaming impossible dreams. She thought of Mary Wilson and all the other invisible people with hidden talents. She thought of the 15 years she had spent waiting for this moment, not even knowing she was waiting. The curtain rose. The lights came up. The opera began. Susan's entrance wasn't until the second scene. She waited in the wings, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. When her cue came, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, which helped calm her nerves. Susan focused on becoming Leonora, the character she was playing. She spoke her lines, moved across the stage as Nancy had taught her, and prepared for her first aria. The moment arrived. The orchestra played the introduction to Pace Pas Mio Dio. Susan took a deep breath, just as she had done in the rehearsal room 3 weeks ago when Kevin had mocked her. Just as she had done countless nights alone in the empty theater, she began to sing. The sound that filled the Oakwood Opera House that night was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. Susan's voice soared through the theater, pure and powerful, and full of emotion. She hit every note perfectly. She held the difficult high notes with ease. But it was more than technical perfection. Susan sang with her whole heart, pouring 15 years of hidden passion into every phrase. In the audience, people leaned forward in their seats. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others sat, with their mouths open in amazement. No one coughed. No one whispered. No one moved. They were completely captivated by the woman in the blue dress with the single pearl at her throat. When Susan finished the aria, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause and cheers. People stood up from their seats, clapping wildly. The sound was deafening. Susan stood frozen on stage, overwhelmed by the response. This was beyond anything she had imagined. Behind the curtain, Peter was smiling wider than anyone had ever seen. Nancy was crying happy tears. Kevin and the other singers were jumping up and down like excited children. The opera continued, but the audience was waiting for Susan's every appearance. When the final curtain fell, the standing ovation lasted for 15 minutes. The other singers had to practically push Susan forward to take extra bows because she was too stunned to move on her own. Later that night, after all the flowers had been given and all the compliments had been received, Susan stood alone on the empty stage. The theater was dark and quiet again, just as it had been on all those nights when she had practiced in secret. Peter found her there, still in her costume, looking out at the empty seats. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Susan smiled. "I'm thinking about how this feels like home. Whether I'm cleaning it or singing on the stage, this theater has always been where I belonged." "The critics are going to rave about you," Peter said. "You're going to have offers from opera companies all over the country, maybe the world." Susan nodded. She knew her life had changed forever. There would be no going back to invisibility now. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I'll never forget where I started, and I'll never forget that there are other people out there cleaning offices and washing dishes and doing all the jobs no one notices, who have gifts the world hasn't seen yet." Peter put his hand on her shoulder. "You've inspired a lot of people tonight, Susan. Not just with your voice, but with your story." As they walked off the stage together, Susan thought about Mary Wilson and wondered how many other hidden talents were out there, waiting for their chance to shine. She made a silent promise to herself that she would find ways to help them,